There is a particular kind of fear that does not come from ghost stories or ancient myths. It comes from the chilling realization that someone is outside, right now, watching you, standing in the dark just beyond your door or window. Maybe you sense it before you see it. Maybe you hear it before you know it is real. But once you do, your heart races, and every instinct screams that you are not safe. Tonight I will share 3 very scary true horror stories, each centered on that terrifying moment when a person discovered that someone was outside. By the time this video ends, you may never look outside the same way again. The first story comes from a man named Kevin, a steel worker from a small town in Ohio. Kevin lived alone in a ground floor apartment near the edge of a quiet neighborhood. His life was simple: long shifts at the factory, late night television, and an occasional beer before bed. Kevin liked the peace and did not care much for socializing, but that peace ended on a stormy night in April. That evening, heavy rain hammered the windows as Kevin came home from work. He changed into sweatpants, grabbed a frozen dinner, and settled on the couch. The wind outside howled like a living thing, and thunder rolled across the sky. Everything felt like a normal stormy night, until he noticed something odd. As Kevin reached for the remote, he caught movement in the reflection of the darkened TV screen, a shadow moving quickly past the living room window. At first, he thought it must have been a tree branch swaying in the wind. But when he turned toward the window, he realized there were no trees near it. Curious, he stood up and walked over. Outside, the storm raged, but there was nothing unusual, just pouring rain and shadows. Kevin shook his head, convinced he had imagined it, and sat back down. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. Soft, almost polite. Kevin froze. It was nearly midnight, and no one ever visited him, especially not in weather like this. He waited, thinking maybe it had been a fluke. But then came a second knock, louder, sharper. Kevin walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. Unease crawled up his spine. He stood there unsure of what to do, when a third knock came from the back door. This one was not soft, it was deliberate and slow. Kevin grabbed a kitchen knife and crept toward the back of the apartment. His heart pounded in his chest. He peeked through the small window beside the door and nearly dropped the knife. Standing in the backyard, completely still, was a tall figure dressed in dark clothes. The person stood with their head slightly tilted, staring directly at the house. The rain poured down on them, but they did not flinch or move. Kevin locked the door, backed away, and called the police with trembling hands. When the officers arrived, the figure was gone. There were no footprints, no signs anyone had been there. Kevin installed security cameras the very next day. The footage never captured anyone, but sometimes on rainy nights, the motion sensor light in the backyard still flicks on with nothing there. The second story belongs to Sarah, a school teacher from a suburban neighborhood in North Carolina. Sarah had bought her first home, a charming 2-bedroom house with a small yard and a white picket fence. It was her dream come true. A peaceful neighborhood, friendly neighbors, and a place where her 6-year-old daughter could grow up safely, or so she thought. One chilly autumn night, Sarah had just put her daughter to bed and was working on lesson plans in the living room. Outside, the wind rustled the fallen leaves, and rain tapped gently against the windows. The soft rhythm of the storm became background noise as she typed away on her laptop. Then came a tapping sound. It was not loud, just a soft, steady tap-tap-tap on the living room window. At first, Sarah assumed it was a branch or perhaps a cat of neighbor. But the tapping continued, each sound perfectly spaced, almost intentional. Sarah's curiosity turned to unease. She set her laptop aside and walked toward the window. As she pulled the curtain aside, her heart nearly stopped. Pressed against the glass face, pale, expressionless, eyes wide and staring straight at her. He stood completely still, lips slightly parted, as if frozen in place. Sarah gasped and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. The man did not move. Fighting back panic, she grabbed her phone and dialed the police. The dispatcher told her to lock all doors and windows and remain on the line. Sarah ran through the house, locking everything she could, then grabbed her daughter and hid in the bathroom. They sat there in silence, listening to the storm and waiting for the police. When officers arrived, they searched the yard but found no one. However, they did find something else: muddy footprints leading from the window around the side of the house and up onto the roof. The realization that someone had been circling her house, possibly trying to find a way in, shattered every sense of safety Sarah had ever known. Despite increased patrols in the area, the man was never found. Sarah sold the house a month later. To this day, she says the worst part was knowing that while she had been inside, living her normal life, someone had been right outside watching. Before we move to the last story, let me ask you something. Have you ever gotten the feeling that someone was watching you, even when you could not see anyone? That tingling at the back of your neck, The instinct that makes you look over your shoulder. Sometimes it is nothing, but sometimes it is everything. The third story comes from David, a night shift security guard for a large warehouse in rural Texas. Job of David was simple: patrol the property, check locks, and monitor the security cameras. Most nights were dull. Long walks through empty corridors and hours of watching blank monitors. But one night during a fierce thunderstorm, David encountered something that changed his life forever. Around 2 in the morning, David was making his usual rounds when he noticed something strange on the main security monitor. A figure was standing outside the front gate in the pouring rain. The camera feed showed a tall man wearing a long coat, standing perfectly still just beyond the fence. David watched, waiting for the man to move on. Minutes passed, but the figure remained motionless in the downpour. David decided to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the gate. As he approached, the figure remained exactly where it had been. When David shined his flashlight directly at the man, the stranger smiled. Not a normal smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far. David called out, asking if the man needed assistance. The man did not respond. He only stared and smiled. A sudden wave of fear washed over David. He backed away and returned to the security office. There, he called the local sheriff. The deputies arrived within minutes. But when they checked the area, the man was gone. David reviewed the security footage with the officers. The monitor in the security room clearly showed the man standing by the gate. Yet when they checked the external recording from the same camera, the footage showed nothing. On one screen, the man stood in the rain, staring at the gate. On the other, there was nothing but empty space. David quit his job the following week. He still refuses to talk about that night in detail, but he always ends the story with the same chilling words. Sometimes someone is outside, even when they should not be. These stories all share a terrifying truth. The scariest threats are often not supernatural. They are the strangers who stand just beyond the safety of our walls. The ones who wait in the dark, silent, patient watching. How often do we glance outside without a second thought? How often do we pass a window, step onto a porch, or walk by a dark alley, never realizing that someone might be right there, staring back at us? So if you have ever experienced something like this, a shadow outside your window, footsteps on your porch, a face pressed against the glass, share your story in the comments. You might be surprised how many people have lived through the same silent horror. Remember, when you hear a soft knock on your door, when you notice a shadow outside your window, sometimes it is nothing, but sometimes it means everything.